On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany, marking the beginning of a major turning point in world history. As the leader of the Nazi Party, Hitler capitalized on economic instability, public dissatisfaction with the Treaty of Versailles, and fears of communism to gain widespread support. After taking office, Hitler quickly consolidated his power by establishing a totalitarian government. This process involved the dissolution of other political parties, strict censorship of the media, and systematic intimidation of political opposition. Hitler employed massive propaganda campaigns to solidify his support while advancing the ideology of anti-Semitism, which became the core of the regime's policies. One of the key outcomes of these policies was the establishment of concentration camps, beginning with Dachau in 1933, initially used to detain political prisoners. Over time, these camps evolved into the main instruments of the Holocaust, where millions of Jews, Roma, prisoners of war, and other groups deemed enemies of the state were persecuted and murdered. This era brought to prominence figures such as Martin Gottfried Weiss, who played a significant role in the administration of the camps. Martin Gottfried Weiss was a Nazi concentration camp commandant, known for his brutality and role in managing these camps, earning him the nickname the Devil from many. During his tenure, Weiss was infamous for his harsh treatment of prisoners under his command. However, little is known about Weiss's childhood or personal life. He was born in Weiden in der Oberpfalz in June 1905. His father worked for the Bavarian State Railways. Weiss had two sisters and was raised as a Catholic. After completing his schooling, he pursued further education in mechanical engineering at a technical school in Landshut. In 1926, at the age of 21, he wore the brown shirt when he joined the Sturmabteilung. In Weiden, his hometown, he formed the local Sturmabteilung and the Hitler Youth structure with his friends. He was one of the first members of the NSDAP. And at the same time, he began studying electrical engineering and graduated in 1930. He worked as an assistant at the school but was eventually dismissed. After being expelled from the school, Weiss decided to tie his future to the SS. By the time he committed himself to serving in the SS, he was married and had two children. He joined the organization in 1932. Looking at his career trajectory, it can be assumed that, like many future concentration camp commanders, he joined the Death's Head Unit, SS Totenkopfverbände, formed by Theodor Eicke. The SS Totenkopfverbände was a paramilitary unit of the Nazi Schutzstaffel, responsible for the management and operation of concentration and extermination camps during the Nazi era. From April 1933, he served with the guards at the Dachau concentration camp. A few months later, thanks to the specialized training he received, he became an engineer at the same camp for more than 5 years. He later served as an adjutant to commanders Hans Loritz and Alex Piotrowski. But in April 1940, Martin Gottfried Weiss received orders to be involved in the construction of a new concentration camp to be established in the Bergedorf district of Hamburg, Germany, known as Camp Neuengamme. In November, he became the camp commandant. Camp Neuengamme was tasked with delivering construction materials for buildings in Hamburg. From April 1942 to July 1942, Weiss was also tasked with expanding the Arbeitsdorf concentration camp, where 800 prisoners from Neuengamme were transferred. This camp was established near Wolfsburg, and the prisoners there would provide cheap labor for the construction of the new Volkswagen cars, which were cheap and available to all Germans. During this period, Weiss held authority over both camps, Neuengamme and Arbeitsdorf, which allowed him to oversee and organize the forced labor that took place in both places simultaneously. And just like the conditions in Dachau camp, the conditions in both camps were equally horrific. These camps were notorious for their brutal forced labor, where prisoners were worked to death by starvation, disease, or torture. However, Oswald Pohl, head of the SS Main Economic and Administrative Office, wanted the conditions of the prisoners in both camps to improve. He did not do this for moral reasons, but rather because he believed that better conditions would ensure that the prisoners would live longer, and that German industry would therefore be able to use them as free labor for a longer period. Therefore, Weiss was given the position of commandant of the Dachau camp in 1942, after he had been heavily criticized by Pohl for the conditions in the camp. Weiss then obeyed Pohl's orders, and on September 1, 1942, Weiss became the commandant of the Dachau concentration camp. Dachau used the method of extermination through labor. Prisoners were forced to work under extreme conditions, without adequate food or medical care. Prisoners were also frequently beaten, tortured, and executed for no apparent reason. As a result, by the end of the war, around 40,000 prisoners had died in this camp. After Oswald Pohl strongly criticized him about the poor conditions of the prisoners, Weiss then made conditions in the Dachau camp more humane, such as beatings were prohibited and food packages were allowed to be sent to prisoners. In addition, Weiss also brought some of his capo from Neuengamme to Dachau. But even though the camp conditions were more humane, it didn't mean that there were no deaths during that time. The last special action of Action 14 of 13 carried out on his orders led to the deaths of 342 people at the Hartheim Euthanasia Center. In addition, during his time as commandant at Dachau, 35 people were hanged and 18 were shot. Weiss worked at Dachau until October 31, 1943. Then Weiss was appointed commandant of Majdanek after his predecessor, Hermann Florstedt, who was charged with massive theft from the Third Reich to enrich himself. He took office as commandant of Majdanek concentration camp on November 4, 1943. On November 3, 1943, one of the worst massacres took place there, where more than 17,000 Jews were murdered during the one-day Action Erntefest. Historians believe that Weiss was present at that time in Lublin Majdanek to prepare himself for his new position. It is certain that on the first day of his new position as commandant, he was responsible for cleaning up the aftermath of the massacre. Martin Weiss's tenure as commandant at Majdanek was also short-lived, as he was only in charge of the camp until April 1944. After this period, he was sent to the Mühldorf subcamp, where Luftwaffe aircraft were built using prisoner labor. Facing the collapse of the front line and the approach of the Americans, Weiss, who found himself back in Dachau, allegedly urged the surrender of the camp to the Allies, refusing Himmler's orders to burn the camp and eliminate all traces of criminal activity. However, the day before the Americans entered, Weiss escaped from Dachau. On April 28, Weiss escaped from Dachau. However, fortunately, his escape was short-lived, as he was captured the next day in Munich on April 29, 1945, by Corporal Henry Senger of the United States Army's 292nd Field Artillery Observer Battalion. He was eventually tried in the Dachau trials that began on November 13, 1945, as part of a series of post-war trials conducted to try Nazi war criminals. During the post-war Dachau camp trials, Weiss tried to mount a defense by insisting that the men who had been executed at Dachau camp were not concentration camp prisoners, but Gestapo prisoners. He said that they were executed on the orders of Heinrich Himmler and the Reich Security Headquarters. After being found guilty of violating the law and the use of war, Weiss was executed by hanging in Landsberg prison on May 29, 1946.